Men's issues are caused by men, and women's issues are caused by men.
It's silly to think that womanhood fully exists without men. The truth of the matter can't be, okay, well then men just have to suck it up. Men and women together, we have to help create a culture that makes it safer for men.
Dating and relationships is really, really hard. It can seem like it's impossible to find a good partner. 63% of men under the age of 30 would describe themselves as single. What's going on here? Why is dating so hard in 2023?
We get drawn into this headspace. Well, clearly the way to live is to focus on myself, build my own kingdom, because everyone around me are terrible whores. These clips go viral of these big panels where a bunch of women look dumb, but you also have to remember, like, who are these women? Random people who were pulled off the street and then fed liquor until their livers were barely even holding on. For every one girl, there are probably like 15 more educated, reasonable women who just knew better than to even go on that show and embarrass themselves. The red pill pipeline, which ultimately there's no way that you get on that ride and you don't come off radicalized. Do they get things right? Absolutely they do.
What do you think about the statement that marriage doesn't make any sense in 2023?
I don't think most people should get married. You should not ever get married if you are not okay with your partner getting fat, losing their job, losing everything they have. And I don't think most people actually are down like that.
Hey everybody, welcome back to episode 9 of Backs of All Trades podcast. And as you can see, this is a special episode. I have my first ever guest. I have Lauren. She goes by the Dadvocate on all platforms. She's absolutely massive on virtually anywhere you can find her, but she'll be humble about that, I'm sure. And she talks about a range of issues relating to divorce court and just relationships and a lot of male issues. But what I really like about the way she handles it, and it is from a largely what seems to be an unbiased perspective, but also a female perspective. And I think that when a lot of men are talking about male issues, it can seem like it's biased. And so, Lauren, I just want to thank you so much for coming onto the show. And, here we are.
Yeah, thank you for having me.
Yeah, so if you don't mind just explaining a little bit about who you are. I talked a little bit about it, but in your own words, what type of stuff do you put out and why do you put it out?
Yeah, so I talk about, as you mentioned, some things dealing with family court, but predominantly relationships, dating, the relationships between men and women mostly, and then diving a little bit into even neurodivergence in dating.
Very cool. And where can people find you? Because obviously I want to go plug you. You're way bigger than I am on this YouTube platform and on all platforms, but there's a good chance that my audience doesn't know who you are.
Yeah, so my biggest platform where I started is TikTok, but now I'm also on YouTube, and you can also find me on Facebook, Instagram, and Patreon if you really, really like me.
Awesome, yeah. And we'll put all of her links in the description below. So I want to get right into it because we're going to talk about a bunch of different stuff on this episode, but primarily we're going to be talking about dating and particularly when it comes to young men and some male issues. I did a whole episode on masculinity, but this is going to be a bit more focused on the relationship side because we have essentially an expert sitting in front of me. And so I want to open the floor and first discuss something that I talked a bit about in the full episode on masculinity, but that's that why do you think that masculinity is something that is still kind of taboo to talk about in 2023, and particularly male issues, whether it comes to, deaths of despair, mental health, trouble in the dating market, trouble in school? Why is it taboo to talk about men's issues?
I think that it's just so much more cool to talk about women's issues. I think that just women in general are cooler than men. And I think a lot of it too has to do with the fact that men are blamed for so many of women's issues that any time we try to bring up the problems men are having, it's very easy to kind of shrug it aside because it's like, okay, well, you may be having those issues, but you are the cause of all of these issues. So we're not going to worry about those until these go away. And it's turned into a very black and white way of thinking for probably most people at this point, even if they don't recognize they've started to get that way. It's just not seen as important, I would say.
Yeah, it's interesting you mentioned that. Something that whenever I would post about, I made a dedicated TikTok video talking about how, there are unique male issues and there are unique female issues. And in my opinion, they personally deserve their own attention, and drawing attention to one is not absolving or trying to say that the other group doesn't struggle with very different. And I think trying to conflate them as well and talking about how one's easier or one's harder is rhetoric that isn't really beneficial, because, at that point you're playing the struggle Olympics. And I got a lot of responses that were essentially saying, okay, so because I talked about, for example, male loneliness, and 1 in 7 men report that they have 0 close friends. And I mentioned that, and they say, okay, so men's issues are caused by men and women's issues are caused by men. And that sort of leaves out the whole, if you're a teenage boy and you feel like you're struggling with a lot of stuff, you don't care who's causing whose problems, right? You're like, no, but I'm struggling. I want help. And I think that any person, whether they're a boy or a girl in that position, deserves to be heard. And so that's where I feel like there's a bit of a missed high five there when it comes to society and paying attention to those young boys.
You're so right about that. It's so weird too, because just moments before I got on this podcast, I was on the phone with my uncle. We were just talking about, some things. I was inviting him out to a Veterans Day assembly for my daughter. And as we were talking, he was telling me that he is afraid to retire because all of his friends are at work. And his big fear is retiring and not having any friends. And so these are in a large part men's issues. Not to say that women do not experience very similar things, but where are the places that people like my uncle can actually talk about these issues that they have? And so when you say, well, they should be able to have some kind of spaces that don't necessarily detract from women who also experience loneliness, you're absolutely right.
Yeah, no, I absolutely agree with that. So obviously your name is literally the Dadvocate, an advocate for dads. And I've been on the internet long enough to know that there are probably some very nasty responses you get, but I bet you that there's some that are a little bit more pointed and would say that you are essentially betraying women, or that you're pandering to men because you are, so outspokenly in support of particularly men on men's issues. And I'm curious what you would say to that, to say that you are essentially pandering either for an audience or for attention.
Yeah, I do get that a lot. I've actually gotten messages from people who, upon only reading my username, have decided that's all they need to know. They've said, all I've read is your username. I'm not interested in anything more, because men do not need a female advocate. That is the last thing in the world that men need. And to a point, I really can't fault women or men for being extremely skeptical of women coming into a space and claiming to speak for men, and for very different reasons, right? I think that there probably are a lot of women who have been burned before by kind of wolves in sheep's clothing, or women who truly do have some kind of internalized misogyny issues, to where, or they've been enough bad spaces that were so pro men that turned so anti women. Or even maybe they were in so many pro-women spaces that turned so anti-men that it's now become a projection. Various different things, but I can't fully fault them because there have been so many harmful people. And I also can't blame men for saying like, whoa, 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 who does she think she is, trying to speak on behalf of issues that she can't fully experience. I can't really fault people for immediately not feeling comfortable. In fact, if I was to be exposed to my content where a strong woman was sitting in front of me and telling me, hey, you should consider men's feelings and consider that maybe when men do this thing that annoys you, it could be coming from a different place. I don't think I would have been very receptive to that 10 years ago either. So I can't blame people, but I do think majoritively, because yes, do I get some critical responses? Of course I do. But majoritively, I receive very, very positive feedback from people who do end up appreciating the content. I think that when you look past it and you realize, like, oh, she's not the same as Pearl Davis just because she likes men. In fact, she speaks outwardly and against many things that woman says. I think then they start to get a little bit more comfortable.
That's so funny that you bring her up. I did almost specifically name drop as an example that I'm sure people would compare yourself to, but you addressed it already, so I didn't even have to do that. That's amazing. No, that's a great response.
I wasn't planning on it.
I think that's a great response. I think that really I love hearing perspectives from different people on a wide array of issues. I would say that when we cut off discourse from particular people and saying that your opinion doesn't matter in this space or your perspective doesn't matter in this space, that's really how we get into these isolated corners of the internet, which I think is a problem beyond just male interpersonal relationships. But I think it's a one where it's affected it really negatively because, there's a whole host of men now that and women, I'm sure, but I'm more particular on the men's side, where there's a group of boys who essentially will see women or girls as sort of this mythical creature that is hard to understand and who knows the reason they act they do. And that's where it can be really attractive to hear like, oh, these are the words you can say to hack her brain, or this is how a woman operates. And they talk about it in a flowchart as if it's a sort of they're an animal and they're predestined to do certain things. And it's because when you don't listen to a woman ever on these types of things, then I think that it will cut off any, differing opinions.
It's so funny you say that. I was just trying to put my finger on exactly how to phrase it, and you saying that has really put some pieces together for me. But you're right. I think that so much of the disconnect between men and women is that men expect women to operate similar to a flow chart. Like, if you do this, then this will happen. And if this happens, then you can make this decision and then this will happen. But no. Women are more like a tabletop adventure where you have to roll the dice. and you have different stat points. Some may have more intelligence. Others may have more wisdom. Some may just have pure charisma. But really, it's all in the way that you roll at the end of the day. There is no set, this always results in that. No.
Yeah, no, I completely agree. There's something I want to sort of hone in on specifically now that we've laid the floor a little bit, which is that it's not just the feeling, but I'll talk about the feeling first, is that I think most people would agree that dating and relationships among all ages, but my audience is primarily that 15 to younger, let's say 25 range, is really, really hard. And it can seem like it's not only impossible to find a good partner, but to even keep the partner. And dating is, should she be able to have male friends? Should she be able to go on girls' nights out? All she wants, she only wants you once you've made a lot of money. These are kind of the rhetoric, right, that is disseminated across the internet. And I want to hear what you think. Oh, and then the stat to back it up is that 63% of men under the age of 30 would describe themselves as single, right? So you pick two men on the street, they have a higher chance of being single than taken. And usually that's not of their own volition. However, many there might be. What's going on here? Why is there such a disconnect, and why is dating so hard in 2023?
I think that it would be super ignorant to not say social media has something to do with this. We're all so much more exposed in every way. We're exposed to everything going on around us. We ourselves are more exposed. And And so it's a completely different culture, and I think we're all still kind of learning how to properly operate within it, you know? And I think it's also kind of diluting down the way that we see reality. Like, I wish I could find the exact study, but there was a study that was done that basically polled a bunch of different people and thought, what do you think the outcome of, say, this war was? How many people do you think died from COVID? How this, and this? And what they found was that people project worse in almost every situation than the reality of what's actually happening. And so because we are so exposed to the worst of every dating story ever, and also the best of single life every single day, that we get drawn into this headspace of like, well, clearly the way to live is to focus on myself, build my own kingdom, because everyone around me are terrible whores, basically. and we get in this headspace, and the reality of the situation is, when you actually like leave the screens and go out in the world and talk to people at coffee shops, like, they're not like this. They're not like anything that we see on TikTok at all. But if that's all we're watching as we scroll and doom scroll before we go to bed each night, then that's what's being set up there.
I think that's really on the nose there. I made a video talking about essentially should men be in a relationship in their 20s, and because there is this rhetoric that you should essentially be building your life, as you mentioned, building your kingdom, and only then should you let someone in. And obviously there's the whole plethora of you've done many videos on the ick, and essentially when you see something that is flawless on social media, then if the person in front of you has flaws, as they do, they're human, then you can feel like, okay, well, my perfect, knight in shining armor is out there somewhere, and it's just about finding him. And so I think that is a huge problem, both on both sides, right? Because the alternative is that, I'm going to find the woman who's traditional and wants to cook, clean, and not have any male friends and not post herself on Instagram, and I just have to go find her, right? And so I think that when that image of the perfect person is something that you feel is attainable, then it really skews your perspective of what a partner should be.
Yeah, and one of the other big reasons that I kind of started shifting my content in the direction that I do, as far as trying to take the most common things people argue about and make them funny, or bring out the humorous truth about how we even get into those situations, is because I started to realize that a lot of the social media was harming my marriage. Because what would happen is I would start my day, a great day with my husband, nothing to argue about. And the next thing I know, I'm on TikTok and I'm watching a video of some other lady's husband who didn't fully finish putting away the dishes, and he only left some of the dishes out. And now I'm thinking about, you know what? My husband did that last week. And I didn't fight about it with him then, but now that I'm watching this video, I'm pissed off about it again. And if you actually read the comments, you'll see that this phenomenon is happening to dozens upon hundreds of other women, because they'll comment and they'll say things like, now I have to fight with my husband, or now I'm mad at my husband. And it's a joke, but jokes aren't funny if there's not truth to them. And, it would start with the little things like this, like, oh, this video is making me mad at my husband again. But then it would also get worse, because there's the additional part of, well, you know what? I'm also going to anonymously vent about this. And now there's hundreds of people on this social media who are like, dump him. He's clearly the worst. And in my head, I'm like, well, they don't even know all the full context, but I do like this validation.
Yeah, no, that's absolutely the power of groupthink. And I can tell you that, some people will hear that and be like, oh, that's the way women are. But men are arguably the same, if not worse, when it comes to finding some reason to bash either an individual woman or a host of just ways that women and girls operate. And that's one thing that I actually wanted to bring up, which is the notion of the modern woman and the problems with the modern woman. And in my episode on masculinity, I discussed at length strides that femininity, I think, has made over the past 40 years. I think that you would be hard pressed to argue that women being able to hold a job and financially support themselves to be free from the burden of having to be with a man is a great thing, because that can get them out of very terrible situations where you are essentially stuck to the person because you can't feed yourself otherwise. Great thing. I think that women have adopted a lot of independence in other areas as well, in confidence and so on and so forth. And masculinity hasn't had that same rebirth, I think, and maybe should adopt some stuff from femininity. But I think that a lot of men will, especially in these red pill spaces, will look towards the strides that women made and bastardize them in a sense. And I talk a lot about how people think that we should go back to the good old days, right? The days, and almost always it's the 50s, 60s, when arguably household wives had it the worst out of any time. And I'm curious what you think about, I'm going to hone in more specifically now, the problems of the modern woman, which is promiscuity, the OnlyFans and all of these different things that they want to sleep around, right? Not really be tied down. And they only want you if you are a multi-millionaire, right? All of this just podcast speak. And what I have to sit down and tell my audience, and I tell them very directly, is that these women sitting on these panels do not represent all women. In fact, they do not even represent a large portion of women.
Exactly.
It's a very, very loud minority. And I'm just going to throw that at you and see if you have anything to stick on.
No, you're so right. And so much of this comes back to what I was saying about how we often think things are so much worse than they really are because of being constantly exposed to the worst of it. And yeah, these clips go viral of these big panels where a bunch of women look dumb, but you also have to remember, like, who are these women? They're like random people who were pulled off the street and then fed liquor until their like livers were barely even holding on. Like, these are not the most constructive panels in the world. And I can guarantee you that for every one girl who again is fed way too much alcohol before even going on that show, there are probably like 15 more educated, reasonable women who just knew better than to even go on that show and embarrass themselves.
Yeah, absolutely. I think that every time someone says in my comments, bro, but it's so hard, the women these days, I do. And I mean it in a sincere way, but I like go out in real life and talk to women in your community. I promise you they don't act that way. And, of course, the answer is, for a lot of men, they don't do that because that's difficult. And they'd rather sit behind a screen and form opinions of the entire gender for reasons that they feel as though, they deserve love. And it's very easy to say, I am not getting the intimacy I deserve because they are acting that way and take no culpability themselves.
It's the loud minority, and I cannot stress that enough. Like, so much of my platform is trying to convince women, like, hey, you are so convinced that all men are bad. Like, you are holding onto this poison in your heart toward all men, like 50% of the population. And in reality, like, most men are not like this. But then by virtue of me creating a platform that's like that, I will get men who come in and they're like, yeah, finally, a woman who's sticking up for us and showing that it's really the women who suck. And I'm like, no, bro, reel it back. That was not it.
Yeah, it's so interesting because I do really like watching your content. I was binging it last night, and you are doing the same thing that I think I do try and target the men on, because the as I said, the problem exists on both sides. And I think that there are a bunch of women who've run amok and hate all men. And there's a bunch of men who have run amok and say that, I don't know if you're familiar with like MGTOW or men going their own way, but essentially who have sworn off dating entirely because they think that it is a dated concept. It is basically impossible in modern society, which leads me to my next question. What do you think about the sort of statement that marriage doesn't make any sense in 2023? It is a dated system, and that there are too many broken things inside of it that, particularly for men, because again, that's primarily my audience, but also for women. Obviously, you're married. What do you say to that?
I will say, I struggle to tell people what the actual benefits are myself. I'm just being completely honest. Like, as a married woman, it just kind of made sense for us. But we were not like hyper religious. We didn't feel pressured. It's very likely that even if the institution of marriage didn't exist, we would have found some way to do something similar, because we're just two people who know that we are a very good partnership together. But I will say this, I don't think most people should get married. That might be a controversial take. I don't think that most people should get married, because what marriage is the biggest commitment. It is massive, and people just jump right into it without, like, they're jumping into a pool before learning how to swim. Most of these people who are getting married, to be completely honest, they're not even thinking about what they're agreeing to, because really, you should not ever get married if you are not okay with your partner getting fat, getting under some kind of debilitating health condition, losing their job, losing everything they have, developing some kind of really bad habit. Like, the things that really, I don't want to say could happen to anybody. Obviously, you'll know after a certain duration of dating somebody if they're likely more predisposed towards something or not. But it's the kind of commitment where, like, you gotta really mean it when you say for richer or for poorer, for sickness and in health. And I don't think most people actually are down like that, the way that they say they are. So, to be completely honest, I don't think most people should get married.
Interesting. Yeah. So I'm fairly young. So I'm 23 years old. That's a bit of a ways away for me. But I think that it's important to talk about. And I'm a really big fan of Professor Scott Galloway, if you know his work. But yeah, he says unequivocally that the most important decision you will ever make in life is the person you decide to marry. And I think that a lot of people do not give it the gravity that it is and it deserves. Right. And truthfully, honestly, I think that up there is still who you decide to form a long partnership, regardless if you decide to get married. Sharing so much of your life with another person, regardless if it has a title or not, can affect your life in so many drastic ways. And so I think that, that's why platforms like this, that's why we can talk about dating for many, many infinite hours, right? And there would still be more stuff to talk about because of how important it is to the human condition. I want to switch topics a little bit and get a little bit more focused on what you would give advice to young men today. And obviously, there, as you said, this is a woman who's married giving advice to young boys. But I think that if anything, that would be one of the best person to talk to, because you've dated and you've decided someone to marry. So in 2023, what would you tell young boys on what they should be doing, dating or otherwise?
Yeah, I would honestly, when people say focus on yourself, I really do think that is one of the best pieces of advice. I think sometimes it can get streamlined a little bit too quickly from focusing on yourself all the way to the MGTOW, as you had mentioned before, and don't let it get that far. But I would say make sure that you're able to take care of yourself, and not just in a way that you can survive, but to where you can actually find joy and peace in solitude, to where you are happy. You can build your own happiness on your own, and then you will find exponentially more success with your relationships with other people, be it long-term partnerships, friendships, what have you. And that the two best weapons you can wield in that journey would be empathy and boundaries. Heavy on the boundaries part, because I think that also a lot of men who are caught up in the dating world and who are trying to not only take care of themselves, but please their partner or the women that they're involved with or the people that they're involved with, not enough men are being told in their youth by other men the importance of boundaries, especially because they're actually told the opposite. They're told, like, happy wife, happy life. Like, if you're gonna date someone, just remember to always say yes and never say no. But in reality, what I've found is when I started getting more and more serious with my husband, as he started letting me know what his boundaries were and kind of setting it up, like, this is who I am, this is who I'm always going to be, I'm not going to change these parts and characteristics of myself, that was what made me grow to respect him a lot more. That's what I would say, personally.
That's a phenomenal answer. It actually hits a little bit close to home. I'm someone who's gone a somewhat radical transformation over the past probably 6-7 years of my life. And I used to be someone who was very, very insecure and did seek, sort of partnership from a girl, more so to validate my own, not insecurities, but to fulfill that goal. And I absolutely would be the stereotypical nice guy in the sense that I would bend over backwards if she asked me to. And I thought that's what girls would want, right? Because of what you said earlier. And I think that, the problem of not having a backbone, and that does not mean, right, putting your foot down on stuff that should be a discussion in a partnership, but it does mean that you do not sort of crumble just because you think that that's what you should do. And that's something that I think a lot of men lack these days, and something that I think we need to build back. I think that this actually opens up the door to another conversation. Great advice. And I want to talk a little bit about there's a bit of a disconnect in my opinion. And I don't even know, this is great. I would love to hear it from a woman's perspective about what women are actually looking for, because in my opinion, there is the desire for confidence, like true confidence. And as you mentioned, boundary setting and all of these things that are more traditionally masculine. But because masculinity has been painted with such a broad stroke to be wholly negative and, you're aggressive and it actually stems from insecurity and all that stuff. I think that there are a lot of women now who are saying, okay, but I know that I talk a lot about, hating men or regardless, but I kind of want a traditionally masculine male. There's this really funny phenomenon going on right now to where it's the super liberal progressive woman with a Republican man who sleeps next to them at night. And it's like, okay, so are you practicing what you preach? Was there a disconnect here? Did society tell you that you wanted something that you didn't really want? I'm curious your thoughts on this.
Yeah, and I'm not blind to that reality either. It's one of those interesting things where it's not, when people say things like, oh, well, women love the bad boys, that's not an entirely wrong thing. Just like when people say guys love the crazy hot girls, like, yeah, we do. Like, we are both so guilty of that historically, traditionally, and stereotypically. But it's one of those things where a lot of it is, it's not necessarily, of course, we are not drawn to someone who's going to hurt us. Of course, none of us go into that thinking like, I don't care if I get cheated on and have my heart broken because he's so hot. It's the confidence factor. That's the thing that is going to get you so far in life. And I don't really know if there's like a cure. I don't know if there's a way to like stop the young people from getting burned. I think it's just inevitable that you're gonna get tricked by one of these like clever hot people at some point in your life. Maybe twice, maybe 3 times. I don't know that there's actually a resolution for that other than learning the hard way.
Yeah. That's true. And I think that also there's the truth there, which I sort of preach to my audience and the boys who watch me, which is that girls do like the authentic confidence, right? As well as sometimes they can be duped by the quote unquote bad boys. But there is truth to being like a strong, upstanding man with morals and confidence. And that's very attractive. And I think that it is just sort of naturally played that sometimes the people who may act or align with the morals that you don't necessarily agree with are the ones who are more willing to fight for those. And so you're drawn to that and you wish there was someone on your side who had all those qualities. It's a bit harder to find. And that's where I can be like, no, it doesn't matter where you are on the spectrum of your beliefs, your morals, etc. As long as you can cultivate a sense of identity that you're willing to stand up for, then that's really all you need. And that's another thing that I think I mentioned it earlier, but you need to have, I'm sure you've heard this, 6 feet tall, 6-pack, 6 figures, or you're ineligible on the dating market. And it just blows my mind because I'm like, no, clearly that it is a less than 1% of the male population, and a lot more people are in many happy relationships. And I think that it comes to that where it's like, oh, if I can check these boxes, then I become an eligible partner, when really it's obviously so much more nuanced than that. And I think that a lot of people would do, you already mentioned it, but like basically working on yourself, I think is really all you need. If you're someone who you think someone would want to date, you're probably right.
I also, it's another funny thing that you said. I think there is some good news for the men, because I know that when men hear like, oh, they have to have confidence, what they're thinking in their head is that like a Giga Chad machismo is probably what women want. But there is good news. As someone in my very early 30s who at this point has a lot of female friends who are either married, engaged, or just still head over heels for a man, there is a different kind of confidence too that women are drawn to. And it is not the pretentious Giga Chad, I work out 6 days a week confidence. There is also I have become so jaded by the world telling me what to fucking think that I just stopped giving a shit on my own type of confidence. We love that. Oh my God. And you do not have to be a certain body type, have a certain career to have that type of confidence. You just have to get broken down by the world enough. And I think we can all agree that we're there.
I love that. Yeah, no, there's so many men will see men who they would presume to be ineligible based on the check boxes that I just said with a woman they would only dream of dating. And immediately they go, well, he must have a lot of money. Well, he must have, this or that or the other. And it's like, or maybe he's just really cool and she dates him because she would pick him over any other man in the universe. And that's not you to decide, right? Because he became someone she wanted to be with, regardless if he meets those check boxes that don't exist to begin with.
Yeah, I also find it very interesting when people start judging other people's choices in man or woman. I find that people become more critical of like a man that a woman chose, even other men occasionally, like, well, wait, why did she choose him? What must he have? Because it's not the physical appearance. So then what must it be? You know, they start doing like all these gymnastics here. Like,
I think that
sometimes stuff you can't
somewhat
see.
makes sense because women are the sort of selector, right? They are the filter. I think that a lot of men, especially the truly quote, and I hate this term, but the truly high value men have their pick of women, right? But for most men, it is them trying to court and women deciding, yes, you know, you sort of won me over. That's not how it always should be, but that is kind of how it plays out most of the time. And so ultimately, when you see a partnership like that, it's like, what decisions did she make? So that makes sense that it plays out that way.
That's true.
I want to talk specifically because a lot of my audience, I sometimes get compared to the wolf in sheep's clothing among my audience because I am very actually outspokenly against many of the red pill, not only personalities, but ideologies, and the same thing with like MGTOW and those sort of just what I would call echo chamber parts of the internet. And
Yeah.
I'm wondering if you have any opinions on the question that I had actually written is, what did they get right and what did they get wrong? Because I have my opinions on this as well, but I'd love to hear your perspective.
Yeah, when it comes to the red pill pipeline, which ultimately there's no way that you get on that ride and you don't come off radicalized. Like that's the thing. If you choose to take a pill, then you're choosing to commit to someone else's game plan. And that's kind of one big thing that I immediately don't like about any kind of pill. The thing is, do they get things right? Absolutely they do. They are very appealing in their honesty, especially to the disenfranchised and the kind of excommunicated from society types of men that no one else will have or show empathy or compassion to. But the thing that those men don't understand is that every accurate point that these manosphere red pill guys have made has been made so much better by someone else. So it's not that they get everything wrong. It's just that there are places that you can go to hear the right things without all the wrong things too. Not a lot of places, which I think is where you and I come together in I think you said the high five of the internet, where there needs to be more spaces where people are listening to men and caring about men without necessarily filling their head with the stuff that like women shouldn't vote.
Lauren, that was so beautifully put. I hold almost the exact opinions. Not to say that I just like hearing my own opinions, but it is like music to my ears. It really is. I think that the stuff that I hear is like, oh, but they tell guys to work out. They tell guys to try and make money, and they tell some truths about the dating world. And I'm like, yeah, there's everybody, you know, that's not only common advice, but it's advice that's been told 1,000 times in better ways. Like you mentioned, the way that I sort of describe it, and I've been thinking about this recently, is for a lot of men, they feel like they're stuck in this pit of despair, right? Life sucks. And if somebody comes down to you and says like, yeah, your life sucks. You're like, yeah, my life does suck. And they're like, well, here's why it sucks. You're like, okay, yes, tell me more. This is great. And that's how you can sort of be pushed down. Whereas what I try to do is say, go down there. And because if somebody just says like, you're privileged, shut up, then you're going to be like, no, right? But if somebody comes down there and says, yes, life does suck. Here, hold my hand. Let's navigate the life that sucks together. Let's figure out how to do this thing. They're going to be a lot more receptive. And that's ultimately what I try to do for a lot of these boys who feel disenfranchised, because it is a real problem. And I think that just to say on the whole, you know, oh, the patriarchy, you're fine, right? That's a terrible attitude, and it's clearly not working, right? There's so many data points to show how men are struggling, and we cannot ignore it, right? That's ultimately my opinion.
Yeah, and so that's one area that I think I would definitely ask, especially the young men, to examine is of course women can be frustrating. Absolutely, as a man. You think that men aren't frustrating to women? Like, of course, we're so frustrating to each other, and you do want a place that you can vent about that. But when you actually like go out into the world and you hear how women are saying that watching red pill content is a direct turnoff, like the fact that this is being said by so many different people, is I would compel you to listen. Just like, women of the world, when you hear men saying, honestly, if my girl watches Drew Afawalo or one of those other hyper like radically feminist, like man hating, like I'm gonna make fun of every bald spot, like overweight, any negative quality a man has type people, I would compel women to ask themselves if maybe that's a valid criticism as well. Maybe that's not the kind of stuff that you should be listening to if you want to have healthy relationships with men.
Nope, I think that's very well put. And I think that really what it comes down to is that a lot of people have lost the plot. Men and women are on the same team. We've always been on the same team. We're different, right? We play different roles. And I want to make it very clear that when I say roles, that women can fill a more traditionally masculine role in a relationship and men can fill a traditionally feminine role. Like, that's completely fine. That's not something, I think that the masculinity, right, when you think of it as what it is, in my mind, it's positive, right? There is no toxic masculinity. There are traits that are toxic that can be prescribed to masculine things, but masculinity should be something that's not only positive, but it's necessary, right? We need it. And
Yes.
same thing with femininity. And that doesn't necessarily mean that as a man you have to be masculine, but again, we are on the same team. My favorite quote from one of my favorite quotes from Scott Galloway, I mentioned him a lot, is that 1+1 = 3 when it comes to a relationship, right? You get more out of doing this thing together than you do the sum of its parts individually.
Yeah, and I think too that that's one of the things that makes me the most sad is the things that people get wrong about my channel is, I can take my licks when it comes to people making fun of like my physical appearance or the way that I add more syllables to words than need be because I'm Midwestern or whatever. But the thing that makes me sad is when people believe that my channel is here to reinforce traditional gender roles, or when people get it wrong that I'm the kind of person who's like pro trad wife. Although if you want to be one, I'm also pro your decision to be a trad wife too. That's because that's what women empowering women is supposed to be. But because at the end of the day, what my channel was always supposed to be as the Dadvocate was to advocate for dad's place in the home outside of the traditional earner role. That was my point. And in addition to that, when people say things like, oh, she's just here to tell women to pick up after men, I'm literally out here saying the opposite. Don't pick up after him. Stop redoing the towels. And maybe your house doesn't need to be perfect. Like these are the things that I'm actually trying to say is I'm actually anti-gender roles. So it does make me sad that just because I talk about gender, people assume that it's to cater to the most stereotypical parts of gender. Sometimes you're the husband, sometimes you're the wife, man.
Yeah. I think that my favorite quality that you have, of which there's many, is your ability to, you call yourself sometimes the male whisperer. But it truly can feel as though when you explain something to a woman, like, hey, this is why men do this thing, whether it's the nothing box or the sink cup, right? It is so validating because it's like, maybe I didn't even know how to put it into words why I do that thing, but my favorite one, because it is set, and I almost want to go just a tiny bit deeper into this, is the concept of mansplaining, because I would say 99% of the time when a man is quote unquote mansplaining, it is not with malicious intent. It is not because he thinks you're dumb. It is not because he, wants to annoy you, right? And so it's like, how did we miscommunicate so badly that something that I do naturally, subconsciously, you interpret as an attack?
Yeah. So much of what I talk about comes from the kind of hard lessons that I've learned through marriage. Because I would say the number one biggest issue that men and women face with each other is communication and miscommunication, basically. And so much of it is never asking the other person why they do things. I think that we very rarely give each other the benefit of the doubt or the presumption of positive intent. And this is like a gender cycle that I've seen since I was a little kid. Like, I grew up and I would see my dad forget to clean the bathroom like he said he would, and then I would turn to my mom going like, he did this on purpose to mess with me and to force me to find my role in the housekeeper and force me to do this. And I would have to be like, even then I'm like womansplaining as a kid. I'm like, Mom, I'm pretty sure he just forgot. Like, I really don't think it's that deep. And yet that didn't stop me from growing up and doing the same thing. And that's actually how the sink cup thing started. Was there would be all these days that I would think to myself, like, he's leaving out this cup because he really thinks that I'm like a maid and a mommy to him. He really thinks that I'm just going to pick up everything after him, huh? And then one day I was like just doing stuff around the house, and I was like, you know what? I don't know if I'm done with this water or not, so I'm just going to put it by the sink in case Oh, shit. That's why he does it. He doesn't know if he's done with the cup or not. And then if he is done, it's by the sink, so he can just put it in the sink. And if it's not, then he can just refill it. I thought my husband was an asshole this whole time. I could have just asked a question.
That's great. Yeah, I think that, as I said, yeah, the male whisperer, I like it, or a translator. For me, what's helped me, and this is not necessarily, it's better even to translate, but what has helped me is, if you've heard the sort of like thought experiments, that the way you see the color blue may be different than the way I see the color blue, right? And there would be no way to reconcile that. You and I can talk about how blue feels to us all day, every day. But when I think about the world and how our brains are wired in such a way that we can try and sort of untangle those mess of what's different between our experiences, but ultimately they're that fundamentally different, such that, as you said, assume positive intent, and you do not operate by the same laws that I do. And so when I do, you might see something as passive aggressive when I didn't even think twice of it, and I might see something as you trying to take my place as a man and belittling my manhood, when in reality you're like, oh, I thought I was helping him, right? There's the classic of like, if an older man starts to, for example, become more physically incapable, I don't need help, leave me alone, right? And it's like, you look like you're hurting, I want to help you. And in their head, they're like, no, I need this, like I have to do this myself.
Exactly. It's interesting too, because I really, earlier I had said kind of, what's the word I'm looking for? I guess it sounded a little bit jaded, but how I said most people shouldn't get married. It's really, they shouldn't without like very, very, very careful consideration, because I would say probably most people who get married don't even have the conversations of how chores will be divided, or what chores they acknowledge even exist. Or then, what are your least favorite chores? What are mine? These conversations aren't even being had, much less in what priority do you put the chores? There's so many different layers, and we just kind of move in with each other and then expect the other one to know, when we've been raised in different ways, we've been socialized in different ways.
I think if I were to try and talk more about what you just said, I think that there is a huge problem, and I think it does stem a lot from social media, of the me-ism, right? That the world revolves around me. And oftentimes people will get into a relationship with a partner and project an image of what they think their partner should be, completely removing the fact that they're their own being, their own entity with their own experiences, as you just mentioned. And so people forget that in a relationship, we're both human. We both have flaws. We both have stuff. And this is where I talk a lot about, you mentioned it at the very beginning, actually, I would love to dive into this briefly, empathy among men. And what I would call emotional stability. And my emotional stability, if I were to describe it, it is not, right, never crying. It is not not feeling depression, anxiety, or any kind of emotions. What emotional stability is knowing your emotions, knowing how to feel them, knowing how to process them, and knowing when you don't necessarily process them in the ways you don't, or the ways you want to, why you don't, right? And I think that a lot of men do not do that. And they think that they should be this emotionless husk, when in reality, it should be, if I'm going to get angry, right, and I know that doing something really small you're going to do is going to piss me off, and then I need to be able to communicate to you that. Otherwise, we're going to become enemies. It's going to be like we're going to, trying to navigate each other's random explosions.
Exactly. And this is another thing, a very simple thing that could be fixed with just more fathers in the home having conversations with their sons saying, hey, you feel angry? Say out loud, I feel angry. That simple connection between a father and a son could cause just decades, a lifelong grown adult who can communicate and have emotional intelligence. But there's really not that many expressions of that. Because again, we have the young men of the world who are looking up to these like alpha males who they're doing the same thing that a lot of the problematic feminists are doing, where they're showing up with problems and not solutions. So they're showing up and saying, women laugh at us when they cry. Okay, that's true. So how do we cry in front of women? There's not enough people, like maybe channels like ours that are willing to have those heavy conversations and say like, okay, this is how you actually communicate your feelings. This is how you open up the door there. And instead It's just kind of pushing us back into the same cycles, because the truth of the matter can't be, okay, well then men just have to suck it up. Together as a culture, men and women together, we have to help create a culture that makes it safer for men to do these things. And we can't just point our finger and say patriarchy. That could be true, but men are really sick of us saying, but the patriarchy, instead of actually contributing to fixing it.
Absolutely. Yeah. Specifically on the crying thing, I think it is so easily disproved that almost it's people aren't doing I don't know if it's the due diligence or the critical thinking, because if I just present you, okay, if you cried because you lost a game of Clash Royale in front of your girlfriend, we both agree that's probably you're a little too hypersensitive. But if your mom dies and you don't cry, she's going to think you're a robot, right? There's levels to this. And so it's not just, you can't make totalities, black and white statements like that. And so, like you said, it's a skill, right? And that's where I think that that masculinity could borrow some from femininity. I mentioned that at the beginning of the episode, is women are taught at an early age sort of how to deal with their emotions. And there might be still things that on the whole could be better, but it is much far night and day difference from how men are taught to deal with their emotions and how to process them. And so I think that learning how to do that would not only just like make men's experiences better, but could probably do away in reducing things like, domestic violence and these really kind of terrible things, because if you bottle it up, there's a lot of science to show that's not healthy.
Exactly. And I think that that's kind of one of the most short-sighted parts about when people try to criticize my channel by saying, oh, well, by bringing so much attention to and centering men, you're really just taking the light off of women, or you're turning against women or whatever. I think that this is such a short-sighted view, because the reality of the situation is, if you're the same ones saying that all of our problems are because of men, right? Then doesn't it make sense that we should help fix the men? Doesn't it make sense that whatever's broken in these men will bring us a lot of peace if we can help fix that too? You know, it's silly
point.
to think that it's silly to think that womanhood fully exists without men. You know, it's kind of like there can be no good in the world without evil, right? Not to directly compare good and evil with men and women. Lord knows that's not the case. But we would not have femininity and we would not have womanhood were it not for manhood. So clearly there is something valuable there.
Yeah, absolutely. And I think that the same can be, the same is true, by the way, on masculinity. If there was, going all the way back, if there was no people to protect, if there was no thing that you are essentially fighting for, then, that there wouldn't be any need for being, aggressive in certain scenarios, right? I think that that's the whole thing about being on the same team.
Exactly. We're just so much better together, and that's why it's so frustrating that it's so hard to find spaces that effectively communicate issues that women face without completely disparaging men. And it's so difficult to find spaces that appropriately shed light on men's issues without ultimately completely disparaging women.
Yep. That's ultimately what we're here for, right? And hopefully that some of our words ring true. I know that we're about at the hour mark. If you have any specific topics you'd like to discuss, then go for it. Otherwise, we can start winding down the episode.
Oh man, we hit on so many different things. You had such a great itinerary set up for us, so I knew we were going to have fun no matter what.
Yeah. No, this was a very insightful conversation, and hopefully my audience, you got exposure to Lauren. Please go check her out. All of her links are below, the Dadvocate. And if you have any more topics that you'd like to hear discussed, maybe if it's popular enough, we can do a round 2. Other than that, if you are on YouTube, please make sure to like, comment, and subscribe. And if you're listening on any podcast platform, please give me 5 stars. Lauren, thank you so much for coming on, and I really enjoyed our conversation. And hopefully, we'll continue to talk async and have more discussions like these, because I really enjoyed it beyond just for the people to listen.
Yeah.
All right. Thank you so much.